After Jake Paul lost to Tommy Fury, there was a lot of discussion surrounding the potential KSI vs Jake Paul matchup and how that would go now. KSI was chirping at Jake for losing, and at the time of recording this video, the tentative December date for the KSI vs Jake Paul fight is still on. Both guys are going to go off and fight a couple of times this year against different opponents, but towards the end of 2023, they should still have their showdown. Before we get into my updated predictions of the fight and who the new winner of KSI vs Jake Paul will be, we need to talk about the YouTube boxing pound for pound rankings. Jake Paul is no longer undefeated, but he is still the greatest YouTube boxer due to his resume. He has beaten the likes of Anderson Silva and came up a bit short against Tommy Fury, who was an actual pro boxer. He dared to be great, of course on the YouTube boxing scale, but still. KSI has the opportunity to take the #1 spot in my opinion if he knocks out Joe Fournier, who actually has a better boxing record than Tommy Fury. Tommy is younger, faster, and he'd probably win against Joe Fournier if they had a fight though. That being said, let's say KSI destroys Joe. He would have beaten a boxer with a winning record before Jake Paul. I think that's enough to put KSI in the running as the best YouTube boxer, but only time will tell if KSI can actually beat Joe Fournier. Jake Paul lost to Tommy Fury, and I think there's plenty of reasons as to why he lost the fight. For one thing, Jake Paul is not used to dealing with a combination puncher in Tommy, and having to defend against the volume of Tommy's offense. Anderson Silva and Tyron Woodley didn't really push the pace and take the fight to Jake in the same way that Tommy did. I think that has to do with Tommy being younger than Jake's previous opponents, and also him being trained solely in boxing since he was a kid. Tommy had a good jab that he peppered Jake with during the fight, and he was slick, moving out of the way of Jake's big shots. He outboxed Jake the entire fight, and while Jake had his moments and got some hits in on Tommy, the latter did a solid job of keeping Jake at bay. Tommy was better than Jake anticipated, and he didn't let the occasion get to him, which was one of my concerns coming in for Tommy Fury. Even though Tommy threw some good combinations, and there were a couple of exciting exchanges, he kept Jake at range with the jab and used his superior footwork to move away from dangerous spots when he needed to. Tommy had a solid performance on the night, but I think Jake came in worse than I was anticipating, and that really cost him the match. Jake's game plan was piss poor in my opinion. He tried to walk forward like Canelo and threw power punches to try to get Tommy out of there. It's clear that he didn't respect Tommy's power and was forcing the knockout. Sure, Jake was jabbing with that awkward body lean he has, and he was trying to vary up his attacks by going to the body, but as the fight went on, Jake was swinging for the fences. All power and no real strategy. The game plan was not good, and I feel like it would have been better for Jake if he tried to let Tommy walk onto a big shot, rather than Jake being the aggressor. Jake has always been decent at countering and landing a heavy right hand when his opponents are pushing the pace. And Song Gibb, Nate Robinson, and Anderson Silva in the last round at least, all tried to pressure Jake, and off the back foot, he picked his shots well and landed clean. I know that Tommy is better than Jake's previous opponents and might have been too fast for Jake to counter properly, but they should have at least attempted something else when the original game plan clearly wasn't working. Jake has power, but him throwing wild overhands without much setup was never gonna work. The most accurate tool that Jake had was the left hook, which he was landing over and over again when Tommy was getting over aggressive. If he implemented more of his counters and not relied on his sheer power and size, then he might have had more success. Tommy won, fair and square, but what does a KSI vs Jake Paul fight look like now? KSI is faster than Jake, so he might be able to throw combinations and then get in and out like Tommy did. It's totally possible, but at some point, Jake is gonna catch him with something big. Jake will be loading up on that right hand all night, and unless KSI has Ultra Instinct or something, he's gonna get hit at some point. Remember, Jake was landing on Tommy periodically, and while Tommy took most of his punches well, we don't know if KSI has that good of a chin. We haven't seen KSI in a long time get properly tested, and his hardest fight to date is Logan Paul still. Logan dropped him with a huge uppercut, and I think Jake is a more accurate puncher when he actually sets up shots and doesn't throw wildly. That being said, KSI also has power and he might be able to pressure Jake with his quick movement. Tommy has a longer reach, so he was able to keep Jake at bay with a jab and circle out if he needed to. So we'll see if KSI can adopt a similar style. Now that we've seen Jake fight a proper boxer, some of the flaws that he's always had were exposed, clear as day. KSI capitalizing on these issues is another story, but KSI winning a fight against Jake Paul isn't out of the question. The pace that KSI sets is unreal, and he's around the same size as Jake. This isn't like a Gibb or Nate Robinson situation where they're tiny compared to him, making it obviously easier for Jake to pick them off. I think the KSI vs Jake Paul fight will still happen in December, and will unfortunately get the Jake Paul-Tommy Fury rematch in the middle of the year. I say unfortunately because I'm not a fan of these immediate rematches to fights that weren't even close to begin with. Jake had some success in certain spots, but Tommy won like 85 to 90% of that fight, to be honest. He landed double the amount of punches that Jake did, and he looked way more composed during the fight. Of course Jake got the knockdown, but it wasn't like Tommy was in big danger after, and he even came back stronger from that point forward. Jake Paul vs Tommy Fury was not competitive, so I'd rather see Jake go back to the drawing board and fight a brand new opponent. If I was the matchmaker, I would book KSI vs Jake Paul for August after KSI's fight with Joe Fournier, and then Logan Paul vs Tommy Fury would be the co-main event. Logan is a way better matchup for Tommy stylistically, and I think that would be a way more entertaining fight. There's a built-in storyline, with Logan getting revenge on Tommy for beating Jake, and of course Jake getting revenge on KSI for beating Logan back in 2019. Both Tommy and KSI are British, they both won a controversial split decision, and I think these two fights make perfect sense. Logan is long, rangy, and more patient than Jake, and that kind of fighter could be harder to deal with for Tommy. August would mark the 5-year anniversary of the first KSI vs Logan Paul fight, when the YouTube boxing scene really took off. It would be poetic to have the finale of this phase of YouTube boxing at least to be set in August. However, like I said before, KSI vs Jake Paul is probably still booked for December, and we don't have a clear indication of how that fight would play out because we're not sure how Jake will adjust against Tommy Fury in the rematch. We can only speculate on how Jake will improve, and by December, both KSI and Jake could become brand new fighters. I do think this Tommy Fury loss has reset Jake's boxing career though, and it makes the KSI fight more viable as a result. To go back to the video's title, who wins now, KSI or Jake Paul? My prediction, KSI.